Morning, everyone. So we are here to talk about inclusive growth. And the frame for this is pretty difficult, right? Income inequality is at the highest in the United States since it began to be measured. Shared prosperity is becoming more and more elusive. Housing prices are on the rise. Wages are stagnant. A lot of bad news. Good news. Across the country, we are seeing cities, given that the federal government, like Elvis, has left the building, cities are innovating on community wealth. They are upgrading the skills of workers. Today we have a report out from Drexel on the West Philly Skills Initiative. They are helping to grow minority-owned businesses all over the country, including from procurement of services from anchor institutions in Cleveland, worker cooperatives. They are raising capital from multiple sources, opportunity zones, impact investing. So there's good news, and a lot of it's happening in Philly. You don't have to steal it, you just have to grow it. But today what we're going to hear are from some incredible examples in Chicago and San Francisco. There to borrow, there to steal. First we'll hear from Andrea Zopp, former deputy mayor of Chicago, now head of World Business Chicago. Incredible initiatives underway there. And then we'll hear from Lashawn Walker, Director of Community Affairs at FivePoint Holding, which is doing some of the most transformative redevelopment in San Francisco. Think Navy Yard on steroids. So first, Andrea Zopp.
Thanks, Bruce. So happy to be here, and so I'll just jump right in. So Bruce said I was the former deputy mayor of the city of Chicago doing neighborhood development, and then moved over to World Business Chicago, which is the city's economic development organization, where our mission is inclusive growth and really focusing on how do we not only grow Chicago, but think about areas outside of our central business district. I went to the mayor's office, and before that, I ran the Urban League of Chicago. So I've been working on access to economic opportunity for a long time, and we have seen some changes in how people think about it. And we've been in Chicago. I went to the mayor's office to work for Rahm Emanuel to help him think through a little bit more how we could be more strategic. And there were a couple of key things that we did there that changed a little bit how we thought about community development. The first was think through how could we better tie what was happening in our central business district, the growth, what I would call organic growth in our central business district, to communities where it wasn't as organic, where you had to do more work. And we did a number of things, but I'll just share one that I think is really the strongest and is easily replicable, and that's was the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. So our downtown developers, in order to expand their the density of their development, have to pay for that, and that they've always had to do that. That money has traditionally gone into environmental impact changes around the buildings, better courtyards, that kind of thing. We took that money and put it into a fund called the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund that we use to grant to local businesses, and it's grants. It's not a loan, it's a grant up to $250,000, and actually we can also do for larger developments in the neighborhoods. And the beauty of this fund is that it grows as the city grows. So just to give you an example, the very first investment, McDonald's moved their headquarters from the suburbs outside of Chicago into downtown Chicago, built a beautiful new headquarters, and put $4 million into the neighborhood investment fund. We then were able to take that money and grant it to 30 businesses in communities on the south and west side. Over the time that fund's been in existence, we've been able to give $47 million to 200 locally based small businesses, and the kind of businesses that you want in your neighborhood. So that's just one example. I think another area, and you talk about this in the report that you co-authored, is thinking about skills and workforce. The organization I run, World Business Chicago, is a business organization. We get most of our funding from the business community that's very engaged in Chicago and civic growth. And one of the things that we found when you're thinking about workforce and skills development is you've really got to engage employers. And we also have to be thinking about this idea of wealth. So, for example, in Chicago, like a lot of places, we've been talking about the minimum wage. That's great. We need to raise it. But let's remember that you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's still poverty wages. And we have too many people stuck in minimum wage jobs that aren't in middle income jobs. If you don't have middle income earners, you can't rebuild the middle class. You can't rebuild the middle class. It's very hard to turn neighborhoods around. So we've been doing a number of things. One of the programs that we did is called the Medical Assistance Pilot Program, and it's a program where we work with our hospitals, a group of hospital anchors who take hourly wage employees. They use their tuition dollars that they have available, pay for them to go to medical assistance training program, and when they get through the program, we provide them wraparound services as well, because sometimes it's a challenge when you're working hourly wage job and trying to support your family to go to school and do all you have to do. But when they get through the program, they're guaranteed a job. So you're moving your employees from hourly wages to long-term to middle-income jobs. And they're expanding that program to other fields in the hospitals. The critical point I would say there is that you really have to engage the business community in what you're doing. And then the last piece I would say in terms of strategy is community engagement, and Lashawn's going to talk about that as well. But we had a tendency in Chicago to just kind of drop in. We're like, here, look, we built a grocery store. Look, we built you a park. And then we'd have a press conference and we'd leave. And we changed that process to better engage communities in a whole host of ways, whether it is putting locally based businesses in the grocery store, whether it is creating community development organizations. We've done one in a neighborhood called Chatham, called the Greater Chatham Initiative. We built one around where the Obama Presidential Center is going to go, called the Emerald South Community Development Cooperative. That's community-based, that's going to lead community development around that economic opportunity that's guaranteed to come into those communities because the Presidential Center is coming there. And so the point is, you can't do this work without people in the neighborhood owning it, because it's their community. And if you just throw stuff at them, they don't own it, they don't engage in it, and it's not sustainable.
Just a 2-second commercial for World Business Chicago, because you're organized a bit differently than most of the chambers or business-led organizations.
Yeah, so we're public-private nonprofit. We're a 501c3. We get the bulk of our funding. We have about 90 companies on our board. We get the bulk of our funding from companies. We get a little bit of money from the city. The mayor actually chairs our board. And then we have a vice chair who I work with closely on a day-to-day basis. But we work very closely with the city, and we're the pathway to engage the business community in what's happening in economic development and have them be committed to the economic growth of the city, both the central city, but also areas outside of the central city.
So there's a couple things we're going to come back to here that are both, tactics and strategies, right? Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, skills coming out of anchors. We'll come back to this question about procurement of goods and services from anchor institutions and how that grows businesses owned by people of color. And then in some ways, maybe the most important thing is community engagement and trust, right? Which is a different kind of capital than what we've understood for a long time. So for that reason, we have Lashawn Walker, who again, if you've ever been out to the Bay Area, I don't know how many people used to go to see the Giants play at Candlestick Park, right? It's why they had all the winds coming off the Bay, and that's why Willie Mays and McCovey didn't hit as many home runs, right? Well, that was torn down, and now Lashawn is part of the team redeveloping it and other parts of what used to be naval facilities. So listen to this story because I think it has enormous implications for this town.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning. As Bruce said, the project that we're building at Candlestick Park is sort of Navy Yards on steroids, right? Was that the analogy? So it is the largest project in San Francisco history that we're building. The combination of San Francisco Candlestick Park and also the Hunters Point Shipyard. It will be the largest development in San Francisco history. So just to give you a snapshot of what we're building at Candlestick, it is 750,000 square feet of R&D and office. It is over 900,000 square feet of residential, multifamily housing, and standalone senior below market rate. We are also doing a 64,000 square foot film and arts center, 130,000 square foot hotel, 220 room. We're doing an international African marketplace. We're building or improving over 100 acres of parks and open space. That's a lot, right? That's a lot, just to give you a snapshot. And so when we talk about community wealth and community engagement, I also want to just kind of contextualize this for you. The size of this project and the community benefits that go along with this project are unprecedented. The project is being built in 2 major phases, and so there are community benefits that go along with both of those phases of the project. In just this project alone, with both phases of the project, there are essentially 3 community benefit agreements for this project. And those of you who are in this work, that is a lot. There's some projects don't have any. And so we have 3 essentially community benefits agreements that will total about $89 million over the life of the project. And so when we talk about how we engage community and build community wealth, then we really have to have locally based, community engaged governance from the beginning. So we've been in the community for over 10 years, and we'll just be going vertical in Candlestick 2 years from now. And so we've been engaging community from the beginning. So there are several community-based groups that are indigenous to the community that have a integral part in deciding how the community benefits dollars get distributed. So while we are only going vertical in 2022, we have front-loaded, sort of made advance payments on our community benefits, and we've been doing that for about 10 years. So that's an idea you can steal. Yeah? So involving community right from the beginning. So I was saying to Bruce yesterday that I attend, and some of those groups, I have a voting, the developer has a voting seat, and some we don't. So I advise, I attend, I participate in conversations around the distribution of funds, but we don't have any vote. It's community-based voting. So I attend about 10 or 11 meetings, community meetings around the distribution of community benefits per month. Just that, in addition to all the other work. So that goes back to your comments around the time it takes to do this. So while those community benefits govern the kind of capital, time, programs that we will create as part of this development, because really our legacy is in front of us, right? Not behind us. We've got over 10 years of building to do in this community from today, and we've already been there 10 years. But in addition to what is legislated in these documents, we're also doing some things that are, we think, creative and go beyond what's obligated, because that's really part of the trust building that you talked about. Some community members have been working on this project and advocating for this project, in some cases while I was still in diapers, right? Because the development time horizon is so long. And so they are completely invested, and they have to feel the trust, because developers are sort of the naughty word, the ugly word, right? Coming into a community and developing, because in order to build something new, something old has to go away. And so you have to build community trust, and there are community members who are deeply invested in this project. And so we have to be very careful. And so we're trying to do some things. Andrea, you talked about demand-driven training. And so we're doing some things to speak directly to the kinds of needs we see in the community that are well beyond what's written in these community benefit agreements. And I'll just give one example. The workforce population in terms of construction and labor in San Francisco is graying, it's aging. And so we need to sort of grow the population that we'll need to build this development of this size and scale. And so in addition to putting money into training programs, we do that, but we customize them. And so when we found out that most of the labor unions for the highly skilled trades you need a C or better in algebra. We created a program specifically to teach algebra and funded it and gave the participants all stipends for attending. So that's not written anywhere, but it's something that we did that helped garner trust, and it was above and beyond what we were obligated to do. So there's a number of things like that that we do on an ongoing basis.
Just talk about the housing piece of this development. Ultimately, we're talking about 12,000 homes,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So it's a small little project.
Right. Right.
And what portion, so when you think about how much of that is for traditional HUD subsidized, federally subsidized, individuals with incomes below, what, 60% of area median income, and how much of it is more going to workforce or the missing middle market?
Thank you. So as Bruce said, we have just a few homes that we're building as part of the project. As I said, we'll be well over 10,000, nearly 11,000 homes when the project is complete on both sides, both Shipyard and Candlestick. Over a third of those homes will be below market rate. Again, just to contextualize this project was entitled in 2 phases. The first phase was entitled in 2004. The second phase was entitled in 2008. If we think about a 32% affordable program for a project that was entitled in 2008, it was unprecedented to have that level of affordability built into the project. And so we will have over 3,000 homes that are below market rate. The depth of our affordability is also quite stunning, from my humble opinion. We are building everything from, we're going from 0 to 160% of AMI. That may not mean a whole lot to a lot of you, but projects typically don't have that level of range. So we are building everything from, we're the master developer for a public housing development in San Francisco, one of the only projects that has a private developer partner. And then we are also building inclusionary, which means there's some below market rate built into buildings that are market rate. And then we're building workforce housing as well for teachers and firemen and policemen and things of that nature.
So as we listen to these 2 stories, I think what we're hearing is, old used term, like a paradigm shift, right? We're going from a community development perspective where we only provided rental housing for people below certain incomes to a community wealth system where we're really thinking about upgrading the skills of workers, raising incomes, giving people's ladders of opportunity, and expanding at scale businesses owned by people of color, right? I mean, this is like baked in now at the local level, hasn't quite made it up to the federal level, right? They're usually the last to get the memo. But we're beginning to get these innovations that can scale horizontally and then reverse engineer federal policy. So Andrea, I wanted you to talk about something that's in the works with your hospitals. You've been looking at Cleveland and what the Cleveland hospitals have been doing to use their procurement to help grow worker cooperatives. Be interested to see how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so the other thing is thinking about, are you doing things that are replicable? Can you figure out how to replicate them? So we are replicating a model built in Cleveland by the Cleveland Clinic it's a laundry linen facility. So the Cleveland Clinic decided they needed to be more engaged in their community. They built a laundry linen facility. It's employee-owned cooperatives. Employees own a piece and they get some profit sharing. And we're replicating that in Chicago. So the challenge in Chicago is it was the Cleveland Clinic said, we're doing it. It's one hospital. They said they'd do it. They put the money in. We have 7 hospitals now engaged in this effort, but we feel really good about it. We've got a location on the west side of the city, and the good news for us also is that the laundry providers for these hospitals, there were 2, 1 closed. They're now down to 1. All of the hospitals in Chicago using 1 provider that's also not located in the city, which is fairly annoying. So we're going to build a laundry linen facility. The hospitals will contribute capital, will raise additional capital. The city is going to contribute the property on the west side and development, and then it'll be employees will have a wealth sharing, a profit sharing piece of it. So not only will they have jobs, but they'll also have the ability, again, to build wealth, which they've done in Cleveland. We will also be able to range jobs not just from on the line, right? Not just people working in the laundry facility, but you also have IT people and HR people and operators. And so we're going to use it to build that range of skill sets in the neighborhood. And then we're going to do some additional development around it. So we believe the project will be transformative for the communities, but it also is, and I just think, you've heard this theme from me, you've heard it from Lashawn, the hospitals are, the anchors are engaged, the businesses are engaged. It's very difficult just for government to do this. The city can do this, it can make investments, it can provide safety, it can improve the schools, it can provide some of the funding, but if we don't have our business community engaged, particularly on these workforce issues now, we're gonna get stuck. And so we're very focused on talking to businesses about what they need and also thinking about what do they need from a business perspective. And Mayor Lightfoot is building on that. She just announced a couple months ago a program called Invest Southwest, which is a program to invest in specific commercial corridors and communities on the south and west sides of the city. The city's going to put in $750 million of dollars, but they're going to use that to incentivize and build on private investment on these corridors. And it really is going to be a public-private partnership, which we're very good at Chicago.
So anchors working harder for the cities in which they're anchored. Now that is a Philadelphia reality, right? I mean, West Philadelphia, Penn, Drexel, the hospitals, the skills initiatives coming out of there are some of the best in class in the country. We're now seeing Temple begin to think about this, Jeff Medical, the Science Center. So this is happening. But what we're seeing is these cities begin to trade back and forth ideas and keep perfecting. Look,
I just want to add one thing. I also think it doesn't, there's a whole range of things you can do. Right. It doesn't, so Lashawn mentioned the skills, the contracting skills. We have an effort in Chicago that the developer is leading to get people ready for contracting jobs. We have a program in Chicago called 360, led by private developers to train individuals from neighborhoods on the south and west sides to get them ready into the trades. We also have an apprenticeship program led by the corporate community using our city colleges. They're now hiring apprenticeships. They created the program and they're hiring the apprenticeships. We encouraged, and then now they own it. So again, it's thinking about how you can engage in ways that work for the business community. You know, the developers are doing it because they need the workforce, right? It's not just because it's a great philanthropic thing to do. They need to have that pipeline of talent, and they need to have it coming from a broader range of the community. So it's a win-win. But it's just intentionally thinking about how can we engage the business community in either using skilled talent or better skilling talent?
So I'm going to come back to you about philanthropy, because I think this is a big issue in this city. This is a very wealthy metropolis, but we don't have the scale of philanthropy that Chicago has, or Detroit has, or Cleveland has, or et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to come back to you on that. I wanted Lashawn to talk about a phrase that she used in a conversation we had yesterday. Everyone in the U.S. is now up to speed on placemaking. She talked about place saving, and I think it would be interesting to have that perspective shared with this audience.
Great. We talked about, again, placemaking and place saving from the perspective of the following. When we talk about placemaking, we understand the importance of sort of co-locating work, recreation, commerce, residential into developments like ours. So I gave you all of these numbers at the beginning of my comments, talking about the size and scale, but the intentionality of the pieces of the project to do just that, to co-locate all of these ideas, to build on the synergies. That's really good, to be that intentional about what you're bringing, but also about what you save, right? And place saving, particularly when Bruce talks about communities of color or communities that have been marginalized and disenfranchised in various ways. This project is big, and it can either be seen as a blessing or the big monster that's coming into a community. And so place saving is really critical. And so a lot of our activity, whether it is efforts that we're making to grow workforce or develop the youth, we do a lot with schools. We're trying to be preservationists also at the same time. And that's not really seen as something that developers typically do, but we're being very intentional to work with the local community to preserve that, which is good, because really we know that only when the truly marginalized lead is when you get inclusion. So that's really what we're trying to bring to the work every day with some of the activities that we have.
So you mentioned this at the beginning, but sort of tease it out a bit, unpack it a little. The governance model that you're using with residents of the community is really quite remarkable. I mean, in most parts of the country, development happens to people. It doesn't happen with people.
That's
so
right.
just play this out a bit.
I will. Thank you. So, as I said, there are, for one of our community benefits agreements, it is $37 million over the life of the project. Just that one agreement. That's a lot of coins. And so there is a community group that was created out of the development of that agreement. They weren't chosen. They sort of created the space and the model for the agreement to even be executed. And so these community members meet 3 times a month. They talk about workforce, they talk about jobs. Again, they were given advance payments on the community benefits. And we've actually made grants out of these dollars. And one of the projects that we've funded through this work was to purchase an old police station in the Bayview, or in the district where we're building in San Francisco. This community group purchased a building and is planning to use this building for lots of indigenous community uses. That was the community group's decision, not the developers, right? And so we're doing things like that and funding small businesses in the neighborhood and creating some set-asides for small businesses. But there's also some things that we've learned, Bruce, some challenges that we faced in doing some of this work as well. That we're early enough in the process that I think we can make some corrections for this legacy that we're trying to create.
So some of this is going on, particularly in North Philly, with Shift Capital and Impact Services beginning to think through neighborhood trusts, different governance models. I mean, if anyone's tweeting, just place saving versus place making, community development versus community wealth, light up Twitter sphere. I just want to, and this is the warning, we're going to take questions, though frankly I can't see a damn thing from here, but that's okay. We'll just shout out, but just come back to philanthropy for a second, because this is one of these areas where cities are highly uneven. They're not uneven necessarily in wealth. There's an enormous amount of capital in US cities and metros, whether in institutions like our pension funds or university endowments, but traditional philanthropy developed in certain places more than other places. This has obviously played a big role in Chicago. I thought you might just tease it out.
Yeah, it's been a big part of Chicago. So just to give you an example, and where I think philanthropy really helps us is it tends to give us the seed money. When you're talking about innovation and doing things that haven't been done before, philanthropy gives you the seed money to get started, right? So the laundry linen project we're doing, we raised the money from philanthropy to do the business plan that we're using now to raise money, to bring the hospitals together, and we didn't have the funding otherwise to do that, so philanthropy helped do that. Philanthropy, I mentioned Emerald South, which is an economic development cooperative, which is an community-based economic development cooperative around where the Obama Presidential Center. The initial round of funding to hire the executive director came from philanthropy. Eventually, that organization is going to make investments. They will generate dollars on their own, but we needed the money from philanthropy to get to get up and running, to begin with. And we've been very fortunate in Chicago to have a strong philanthropic community that's deeply engaged in what's happening in the community. So philanthropy is also leading a significant effort around public safety and around investments in public safety, community-based violence interruption, job training and mentoring for violent offenders and people, young people most at risk of either being a violent offender or a victim of violence. That's being significantly led by philanthropy in Chicago.
And bottom line, I don't want to diss Philly philanthropy. William Penn, Philly Foundation, Halloran, we've got great philanthropies here, but the scale of philanthropies don't fit the size of this city or metro. And there is wealth here. We just have to figure out how to organize it in a different kind of way. I want to take some questions from the audience. And so, because this is obviously highly relevant, there's a question up here on the left. Larry, can you see right over here? Yep. Can you state your name and
off of that stuff?
I'm sorry, my name is Allison. My question is about in Chicago, when you say that you're developers, now you can hear me, developers,
No, the developers are working with the unions to do the training. So, so the developers have the project, and in some instances, not all, but in many, this is about getting people trained into the trades. So the developers are doing the projects. Oftentimes you need someone to sponsor you into the apprenticeship program, and so they're partnering with the union. So it's not a separate training program. It's partnering with the unions to get a more diverse, in Chicago, not unlike many other places. Our trades are not as diverse as the city needs to be, and so it's a partnership. And the key is in public development, there's a requirement, right? The unions are required to participate. So, but in the private development, the developers have to choose to do what they're doing, and they're choosing to do that because in the long run, it's in their best interest.
any thoughts on this?
Yes, in San Francisco too, there's partnership between the work that we're doing as developers and the labor unions. I will add that in addition to having to be sponsored to join an apprentice program, it also tends to be a barrier for workers to join unions, just to join them. The initiation fees are very, very high in general, and the monthly dues can be barriers as well. So one of the things, and this is again no slight to philanthropy, but in San Francisco, it's often philanthropy that comes in behind private dollars, that we are taking more risk in certain places. And so we tend to sponsor and support the paying of union dues and initiation fees and things like that.
Questions, comments, criticisms?
Hi, Amina. Okay. Okay, Amina.
Do we have 2 hours? No.
Okay, some complications. Well, one, I think, sort of jumps out when we talk about this, again, this community benefits agreement that is $37 million over the life of the project. It was codified to focus on workforce and housing. So we're having to go through some machinations to make the change, to be inclusive of the small business community with some of those dollars. In retrospect, we would have added small business as its own category of funding. So that's one. Two, another maybe easy one, is when we talk about, again, job training and wraparound services for workers. So while we created a program that was demand-focused around a math academy, so I created a math academy. We heard that there was a shortage of skilled workers or workers who had the competency to pass the algebra with a C or better. Most of the unions, skilled trades, you have to have had algebra and pass with a C or better in order to get into the union. So we created a math academy to do that, specifically for that. That's all the training was about, was getting people through that algebra exam for electricians and that kind of thing. And we paid stipends. But what we didn't do was make certain that there was some wraparound services around those trainees, around those students. So people were having things like childcare issues and driver's license and suspensions and things like that, that other things that needed to be mitigated. And so while we were solving for one set of problems, we weren't solving for sort of the whole person. And those are the kinds of services that workers need in addition to the competency improvement.
You know, Lashawn, just both of you in some ways, because you're so focused on the whole person, the whole neighborhood, the whole city. And what we have are still systems that come down vertically. You know, here's small business, SBA, here's HUD, here's commerce, here's education. You know, what comes down from the national government and the states are just verticals. And you're at the local level just braiding and blending all this together. I mean, it's really quite interesting that cities are sort of enabling a new kind of integrated, holistic approach.
Well, it really comes down to, again, yes, it's 750,000 square feet of office, and it's, you know, a 220-room hotel, and it's a 1,200-seat film and arts center. That's true. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the citizenry who are engaged from the beginning. It comes down to the worker who can't get childcare. In order for us to do this, right, we've got to do this.
Absolutely.
I also think we know that, and we've seen that doing little projects and pieces isn't going to work for transformative community change. And we also have to remember, we have underinvested, at least in Chicago. We've underinvested in these communities for a really long time. We have people who've been living in poverty, and it has an impact. There's barriers. So we had schools that were grossly underperforming. So if you're going to a school system we had communities, I sat on the school board in Chicago, we had communities where on the south and west side, there was no performing school, none. So if you have to send your kid to public school, they're guaranteed not to have a performing school. And so you have to fix that, right? And we all know, we know what good neighborhoods look like. We know what's there, and so we have to be, sorry, apparently I broke it. We have to be engaged in fixing the range of pieces. Just like we have to, in Chicago, we have to be focused on safety. We're not gonna be able to change communities if people don't feel safe, or not just feel safe, are safe.
So I'm gonna finish with this question, because if we're gonna basically crack at this intergenerational poverty in this city is 25%. And there's some argument about it, but it's very, very high. If we're gonna crack at this, we're gonna have to radically upgrade the skills of our workers, and we're gonna have to grow businesses owned by people of color by 2x and 5x, and change the access to capital for these businesses. We were at Della Clark's Enterprise Center yesterday. We were with Tayyib Smith from Little Giant Creative. This is radical change. And you're from two places who have done dramatic things. One piece of advice, I think we've got a lot of very incredible nuggets here. One piece of advice as this place tries to sort of chart a new course for community wealth.
I'll start. I'd say two things. One, I think you have to try for small wins, right? The communities have been, they've been talked to, they've been planned to death. So I think you have to try for some small wins. One of the nice things about the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund was literally like, here's the money, go. And here's some supports to do it. So you could see it. But you also have to have a longer range view because it takes time, right? You're not going to transform communities overnight. It's a multi-year, decades-long investment, and so you have to have that longer view, but you also have to try and make some deliveries for people in real time.
Fantastic.
I would say it's not broken. See, it's magic. I would say it's relationships. So there have been programs that I was working on before I joined this development company in community development, and I thought if I just had some money, I could solve that problem. When I came to this company, I had the privilege of having the money, put the money into that program, and it still didn't work. So, but that's a beautiful thing to come full circle and be able to fund something that I once started and thought if I just had money. So it's about the relationships and really wrapping around community. And so when you're trying to do something, please do it with other people. You'll have greater success.
Okay, thank Andrea, thank Lashawn. Great to be here.